Section 3.2 is where we will write compound statements for conjunctions and disjunctions and determine truth values. We'll also identify hypotheses, conclusions of conditional statements, and write related conditional statements. A statement is any sentence that is true or false. So I am wearing shoes is an example of a statement. A truth value is you putting true or false. So using the above statement, I am wearing shoes, this is true if I'm at school, but false if I'm at home. Negation means that you're doing the opposite. We will put in this symbol, this little squiggly line, to show to do the opposite or the negation. So I am wearing shoes. The negation of that sentence, I am not wearing shoes. Compound sentence statements are two or more statements joined by the word and or. You live in Iowa is statement 1. You are a student, statement 2. You live in Nebraska, statement 3. So these are their truth values for those statements. Now we will show you what it looks like as a conjunction. So a conjunction is a statement using the word and. It can only be true if both parts of the statement are true. So this is the symbol we use to show an and. You live in Iowa and you are a student. So using P and Q from the previous and putting the word and in there. That is true. You do live in Iowa and you are a student. P and R means I would use P and R. So you live in Iowa and you live in Nebraska. That is false. You just live in Iowa. A disjunction is where you use the compound statement with the word or. This is true as long as one of your portions is true. So we will use this V shape to make an or. So P or Q, you live in Iowa or you are a student. This is true. I live in Iowa. P or R, you live in Iowa or you live in Nebraska. That is also true because you live in Iowa. So it doesn't matter that this one is false. You just need one of them to be false or true. So example number 1. We're going to use these statements to write compound statements for each conjunction. Then find the truth values. So letter A, it wants P and R. So I would write the statement for P, the figure is a trapezoid, and the word, R, the figure has 4 right angles. So I'm looking at this picture. Is the figure a trapezoid and has 4 right angles? It does have 4 right angles, but this is not a trapezoid. So this would be false because it is a square. Part B, negation of P and Q. So I'm doing P, but I'm doing the opposite. The figure is not a trapezoid. And, so symbol for and, the figure has 4 right angles. 4 congruent sides, So the figure is not a trapezoid. That is true. The figure has 4 congruent sides. That is also true for my picture. So true based off of my picture. Now look at example 2. Use the statements to write a compound statement for the disjunction P or opposite of R. Then find its truth value. So here are my statements, and I'm just translating these symbols into words. So P is this statement, so that would be the first thing I write down. A, B, C, and C, B, D are complementary. This symbol means or, so I would write the word or. This means I'm doing the opposite of what R says. So AB is not congruent to BD. So that's translating these symbols into these phrases. So, and if it's an or statement, I just need one of these to be true. So ABC and CBD are complementary. That is false. AB is not congruent to BD. That is also false. So this statement would be false because both parts are false. The other part we will talk about are finding hypothesis and conclusion, writing an if-then statement, and also writing related conditional statements to that. So an if-then statement is written in the form P then Q. So if you have 2 sentences, it is raining, the parade will be canceled. The if-then statement would be written, if it is raining, then the parade will be canceled. The hypothesis is always the P, the part that has to happen. So in my if then, it is raining is my hypothesis, the part after the word if. Conclusion is the answer, so the part that will happen based off the hypothesis. So the part after the word then is my conclusion. The parade will be canceled. Then you have three other related conditional statements. So a converse is where you switch the order of the hypothesis and the conclusion. So if the parade is canceled, then it's raining. The inverse is where you negate both of them. So keep the same order as the original if then, just negate it. So if it's not raining, then the parade will not be canceled. The contrapositive is where you get to do both of those things. Switch the order and negate it. So if the parade is not canceled, then it is not raining. Let's practice finding that vocabulary. So in your first sentence, it says, if a polygon has 6 sides, then it is a hexagon. The hypothesis is the portion after the word if and goes all the way to the word then. So make sure that you do not include the word if. The conclusion is the portion after the word then. On letter B, another performance will be scheduled if the first one is sold out. So my if part is this part. So my hypothesis is behind the word if. My conclusion would be a performance would be scheduled. Pause the video and try the check question. You should have identified the forecast is rain for the hypothesis, and I will take an umbrella for the conclusion. On letter B, its last digit is 0 is the hypothesis. A number is divisible by 10 is the conclusion. Example 4. Identify the hypothesis and conclusion for each conditional statement. Then write the statement as an if-then form. So in this scenario, the hypothesis will be if you have 4 quarters. The conclusion will be you can exchange those for $1. So writing it as an if-then. So that means you have to have those words. If you have 4 quarters, then you can exchange them for $1 bill. Over here, the sum of the measures of 2 supplementary angles is 180. So my hypothesis is if I have 2 supplementary angles, then the sum will add to 180. So that's how I wrote it. If 2 angles are supplementary, then they will add to 180.
Could I get a cheerleader to come to the office? A cheerleader to come to the office.
Pause the video and try the check question. So you had to identify the hypothesis. So my hypothesis would be a polygon with 2 sets of parallel sides. My conclusion would be it's a parallelogram. So writing it as an if-then. If a polygon has 2 sets of parallel sides, then it's a parallelogram. Okay, now applying all of our vocabulary words. So in example 5, it says the tang is a saltwater fish that inhabits shallow coral reefs in tropical areas. Tangs are part of the Acantheridae family, along with surgeonfish and unicorn fish. All members of the Acantheridae family are saltwater fish. Write the converse, inverse, contrapositive of the true conditional statement. Tangs are fish that live in water. So here is my statement. Determine if it is true or false, and if it's false, provide a counterexample. So the first thing is write it as a conditional statement. So that means it's an if-then form. So I would write, if a fish is a tang, then it lives in salt water. So tangs are fish is going to be my hypothesis. Conclusion, they live in salt water. Next is the converse. Converse is where you just switch the hypothesis and conclusion. So if a fish lives in the salt water, then it's going to be a tang. You have to determine if this is true or false. So if I live in salt water, will I always be a tang? No, this is false because I could be a shark. A shark lives in salt water but is not a tang fish. Inverse is where you're going to negate it. So don't switch the order of the original, just negate it. So if a fish is not a tang, then it does not live in salt water. So thinking about it for a second, if a fish is not a tang, so like a shark, then it doesn't live in salt water. That's false. A shark can live in salt water. One thing to keep in mind is that the converse and inverse will always have the same truth values. So if that one is false, they're both false. If one is true, they're both true. So these two should always have the same truth value. A contrapositive is where you do both parts. So you will switch it and negate it. So if a fish does not live in salt water, then it is not a tang fish. So if I'm not living in salt water, then it's not a tang. That's true, because if I'm not living in salt water, there's no way that it could be a tang fish. True. Sometimes people get confused on the wording of the contrapositive. So if you ever get confused, just go back to the conditional and check its truth value, because these two have to match and these two have to match. So if the conditional was false, the contrapositive is false. If the conditional was true, the contrapositive is true. Okay? All right, pause the video and try the check question. So in the check question, they already gave you the conditional statement, so you just had to rewrite it. The converse would be you switching the hypothesis and conclusion. So if an orchestra contains string instruments, then it is a string orchestra. I said false because the bands could also have drums. Inverse is where you negate it. So keep the same order. If an orchestra is not a string orchestra, then it does not contain string instruments. Again, false. If I was in a band, I can have drums inside of there. And, I could have drums, but I could also have string instruments inside. Contrapositive is where you have both of them. So I'm going to negate and switch. If an orchestra doesn't contain string instruments, then it's not a string orchestra. This is true. All right, so that's part 1 of section 3.2. If you are needing part 2, that would be where we listed it as section 3.2, day 2. That's where you're going to clue in here. So the other part of this lesson is talking about biconditionals. Okay, biconditionals and symbols is a double arrow from both sides. And when we write it, we will put the phrase in there, if and only if. So for example, Aaron earns a 3.5 or higher GPA. Aaron will be accepted into culinary school. So a biconditional would be Aaron will be accepted into culinary school if and only if he earns a 3.5 or higher GPA. Both the conditional and converse statements must be true in order for you to write a biconditional. So what we're going to do is check on this first example if the conditional and converse are true, and if they are true, we're going to write a biconditional. So example 6, letter A. Rasha listens to music when she's in study hall. So I wrote it into a conditional. Now you can actually go either way. If Rasha is in study hall, then she's listening to music, or you can go in the reverse. So if Rasha's in study hall, then she's listening to music. That is true. So if she's in study hall, we know she would be listening to music. I also could understand that it could be false. Just because she's in study hall doesn't matter if she's listening to music. So I don't particularly like this example, but I could understand why it could be either way if you were able to provide a good explanation. But the book kept it true, so that's how we're going to have it. Converse, if Rasha is listening to music, then she's in study hall. That is false because I could be listening to music somewhere else besides study hall. So since that this one was false and the other one was true, we would not be able to write a biconditional. So both of them would have to be true in order for you to do it. Let's look at letter B. If two lines are parallel, then they have the same slope. So I just copied down the same sentence for the conditional statement. Is the conditional statement true? Yes. If two lines are parallel, then they must have the same slope. Converse is when you will switch it. So if two lines have the same slope, then they are parallel. That is also true, because if they have the same slope, they are parallel. So since both of those are true, we can write a biconditional. So take off the words if and then. In replace of the in, we're going to put the phrase if and only if. So two lines have the same slope if and only if they are parallel. Pause the video and try the check question. In the check question, you would be writing it into a conditional statement. So if a triangle is isosceles, then it has at least two congruent sides. This is true. That's the definition of isosceles. Converse is where we will switch it. If a triangle has at least two congruent sides, then it is isosceles. Again, that is true. That's the definition of isosceles. So I would write my biconditional. So take off the words if and then. In replace of then, you're going to put the phrase if and only if. A triangle is isosceles if and only if it has at least two congruent sides. Example 7. Determine the truth values of biconditionals. So we're going to take this statement and we're going to write it into a conditional and a converse statement. And then we'll determine if it is true or false. Two angles are complements if and only if their measures have a sum of 90. So just go in the reverse. Take out the phrase if and only if. So take this phrase out. Put the word if in front. Put the word then where you had that phrase. So there is your conditional. If two angles are complements, then they add to 90. Converse is where you're going to switch it. So if two angles add to 90, they are complementary. Both of those are true, so therefore your biconditional in this statement would be true. Pause the video and try the check question. So again, take out the phrase if and only if, and then put in the if in front, and the then where you took out your phrase. So my conditional statement would be, if x is greater than -2, then x is positive. That is false, because if x is -1, that would not work. It is greater than -2, but it is positive. The converse would be switching it. If x is positive, then x is greater than -2. That is true. Since one of them was false, that means that this entire biconditional is false. All right, that concludes section 3.2, where you were writing a ton of conditional statements, identifying the hypotheses and conclusions, and then finding all of their truth values.